Okay, so just some laundry list items before we begin. If you look to the bottom right, there are two features. There's your chat function. You can talk to other people. You can send any messages that you want. Everyone will be able to see it, and you can even tag people if you're having a conversation with them. We also have a Q&A feature. If you have any questions that you really want answered, you can ask a question here, and then people can upvote it, and that way we can put your question on the screen if it gets enough upvotes, just like I did now. You also have a fun little feature called emoji reactions at the bottom. If you like what someone is saying, just give them a nice little emoji reaction. Keeps the content engaging and it just makes people feel good. So there, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Nilcha.
Welcome, everyone. And this is our 6th webinar this year. We're really excited and starting to see some of you return each month. And we thank you for that. I'm really excited tonight because this is a really important topic and we all need to really be aware of how do we self-advocate or advocate for ourselves when we have a medical issue, whether that means a hospital, emergency hospital visit, a procedure that is planned, a surgery planned or unplanned, any number of things. But how do we handle that? You know, and especially in a long-term situation, infections can be brutal. And so we've got some great people here that are going to share their stories with you. Eric Ditchman and Dawn Edwards have both have some great stories to tell and their special tips on how they handled their long-term hospitalizations. And then we have Phyllis and Haas from the Network 5, and she handles actually on the other side of the fence, all the stories about grievances, people that have issues. And I'll tell you, she's a pit bull and you want her on your side. So Jen Ravert was a home training nurse and now works as program director for MEI. And I'll let each of them tell them a little bit about their story. Let's start with Eric. Oh, you're on mute?
Yeah, hold on. There we go. Hi, my name is Eric Ditchman. I live here in East Lansing, and I have been dealing with kidney disease for over 40 years. But but I also was a river scientist and watershed scientist until about 23 years ago when I hit end-stage renal disease or kidney disease, and basically been home dialysis ever since. And so had a recent hospitalization for over the last 6 months, and so I look forward to sharing some of that with you. I look forward to meeting our other panelists.
And Dawn?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dawn Edwards, and I'm from Jamaica, Queens, New York, and I am a 33-year kidney patient. I've done all forms of kidney replacement therapy, and I'm currently on nocturnal home hemodialysis, and I'm waiting for my second transplant, and I've been a patient advocate for over 30 years with various kidney stakeholders. I'm currently a board of directors member for Home Dialyzers United. I also am the co-chairperson for the Forum of ESRD Network's Kidney Patient Advisory Council. That's a mouthful. They call us the KPAC. And I am also the CEO of my own patient advocacy organization called the CKD Champions. And it's great to be with you all this evening.
And Jen, tell us a little bit.
So my name's Jen. I came into the dialysis sphere because my mom, my stepdad, my grandmother, my best friend all ended up on dialysis. And then I ended up going to nursing school. And I became a home dialysis training nurse. I taught PD, I taught home hemo, I taught on every single machine and system I possibly had available to me. I'm kind of a geek in that way. I really enjoy knowing different systems and how to switch between them. And then I got poached last year by MEI, and I'm now program director because I really spent a lot of time trying to improve a system that I was not able to improve as a nurse. So I left clinical care and here I am. Hello. Good evening.
And Phyllis.
Hang on.
Okay.
I had to get off mute. Hang on.
MEI is Medical Education Institute. It also sponsors the Home Dialysis Central Facebook group or support group and a wealth of education. If you need an answer to anything, it's going to be on the Home Dialysis Central website. And Phyllis, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I would have forgotten that if I waited another second.
No, that's okay. It really is. It's just fine. I'm flattered, actually, that you asked me to participate. Thank you so much. A little about my background. I tell people that my very first paycheck in social services was in November of 1981. I was in high school, but it's been a long ride. When I finished my undergrad, I did several years in long-term care, and I tell people that I started out as a gopher to a wannabe. I could not have been further down the ladder. Sometimes I think I started even sub-basement. Was very fortunate in that I was able to kind of work my way up through the ranks, so to speak. I ended up being a regional social worker for a chain of nursing homes. And I would love to tell you that job was, sitting on a couch pretending that 45 minutes is an hour and making folks feel better. But in long-term care, that is going through the facilities and auditing them continuously and saying, the patient has the right to accept or reject care. No, you may not punish the patient. No, they can stay up as late as they want. All of those things that amazingly I found prepared me quite well for grad school. I was able to get a master's in administrative social work. So again, great appreciation and kudos to my colleagues that are in the trenches providing that one-on-one therapy. That is not the gift I was blessed with. My husband tells me that I'm the guru of bitch, moan, and groan. So if you got a bitch, moan, and groan, call me. Call me. We pretend like it's a grievance, but we know what it is. So
And
go ahead, give me a
just talk a
call.
little bit about the networks that that you work for.
Absolutely. In the early 70s, the medical establishment as a whole decided that dialysis really, in fact, was science, not hokum. And Medicare coverage was expanded to include dialysis services. In the mid 70s, again, congressional legislation expanded Medicare coverage to end-stage renal disease patients receiving dialysis. That coverage is available to you regardless of how many quarters you've paid in, how much money you've earned, any age. If you are end-stage renal disease in this country, you can get Medicare coverage for dialysis. Well, Congress doesn't give without taking away. So they authorized the program and expanded the coverage, but told Medicare that they would need to have a neutral third-party agency overseeing them. So in a nutshell, that's what networks are. The United States and its territories are divided into 18 different regions. They're called networks. And we all operate on 5 to 6 year contracts. The services have expanded in the last few years to include research assignments. So we have Network 5 has 3 full-time project managers. It's also expanded to include on-site training and support. So my counterpart, Renee Bovacalis, leads that program, and she actually takes other staff members into, it's not a politically correct word, but it's a true word, which is low performing facilities. When your numbers are low and you report out multiple infections, multiple patient complaints, doctors not comfortable, etc., you're going to get a visit from Renee and her team to, not in an adversarial manner, the state surveyors take care of that, but for her to come in and say, these are ideas, these are things that can help, this is Medicare's suggestion. We run a top-notch data collection department. Those commercials that you see on TV that say things like 4 out of 5 dentists surveyed. Okay, well, for us, it would be 4 out of 5 nephrologists surveyed report that, whatever it is. That's the research that we're doing. So everybody else does that end of it, and I get to talk to patients.
Which is great. So let's just jump right in and talk. I mean, talk about what we have to do to help ourselves. And one of my favorite topics is labs. And I can remember seeing, so many posts by patients in our support groups saying, my labs are bad, or my doctor said my labs are good, but I still feel bad. So let's talk about labs, because they are critical to your well-being. And just knowing that your labs are okay, I don't think that's enough. What do you think? Jen, let's take it first from a professional. Mute.
Recently, I went to the doctor, and I don't have kidney disease, but I went and I had labs done, and they came in and they told me my labs were fine. As a professional, and as a patient who is also a patient of, I'm a patient too. Everyone's a patient. I don't know what that means. I really wish people would stop saying things like fine, good, bad. These are all very binary terms. Labs are a number, a value. It's very rarely it's an on-off switch. And it doesn't necessarily matter what the labs say, because part of a good dialysis prescription, part of having a plan that's working for a person, isn't just what the numbers say. That's almost that's a component, but it matters how functional a person is, how they're feeling, what they're capable of doing. That, in my opinion, is a greater measure necessarily than any one specific lab in a vat.
So, Eric, you were just in the hospital for a extended period of time. How closely were you watching your labs?
So just real quick, one thing I forgot to mention, I have, since I lost my use of my kidneys, I have become a patient advocate. I think I forgot that part. And I've been very involved in trying to educate others, hoping to make their lives a little easier than it might have been for me and some of my pioneer friends on the line today. So even before the hospitalization, I think it depends on which labs, right? Because some labs can be in a normal area, but it could still lead to problematic side effects or illnesses. For example, anemia. For dialysis patients, we are supposed to be in a good level for hemoglobin, which is our blood count, if it's in the 11 range, right? Somewhere between 10 and 11 is good. For me, 10 is on the couch. Yeah. 12 is better, but because we also take medicine to help us create blood cells, there's a risk involved in that. So they don't want, they meaning, our physicians and Medicare, don't want us to exceed 12 because we might increase our stroke risk. But when I find that I'm at 9 or 10, my effectiveness, my productivity just decreases tremendously. And what kind of life is that? So not only are we dealing with the management of the dialysis, right, but then we have to deal with specific things. Another one might be phosphorus or potassium. Obviously, potassium we want to be careful of because, that could be a heart killer if it gets out of control. But definitely on the hemoglobin, hematocrit, that's one I beg to differ. And luckily, I've had a great physician. So we've chatted with this. We don't want the roller coaster of jumping down to 10 or lowering down to 10, getting up to almost 12 and then coming down, because you can't live your life bouncing back and forth between, yes, let's go, to I can't get up. And so that's just one of mine. And then luckily, and we'll be talking about care partners, but luckily my wife is my high school sweetheart. She's also been my kidney donated. She donated a kidney to me. I've had two. They both failed due to focal segmental glomerular sclerosis, which is called FSGS. But she was actually watching my labs much better than I was in the hospital because it was really difficult to measure them on my own or to see they were going. But it's that education, I think, that Jen was talking about. We really have to be educated about why we are watching labs, regardless of whether you're in kidney disease or just, any other diseases, and what they mean, so we can have informational conversations with our physicians.
Absolutely. It is critically important to understand those labs and what they mean to you. So when you say 10, a hemoglobin of 10 puts you on the couch, I'm the same way. If my hemoglobin drops below 11, I know it in a heartbeat, and my heart actually knows it now because I'm getting up there. But so there's, you know, a lot of like repercussions that come if those labs aren't in the right range for you, and it's nobody's going to know that but you over watching labs for time. And we all have gotten that lab report that comes from with the dietitian with the little happy face on it. And how do you feel about that, Dawn? Let me ask you.
Um, I think that they're ridiculous with the little happy faces and everything. I mean, we're not in school anymore. However, I do look forward to getting my lab results. I'm thankful that we have the online based um, where we can go in and check our labs after we do our monthly lab work. But it's really important, and I can't impress this enough for us as kidney patients. Your labs are that's your life. For me, my labs, number one, they tell me how I'm going to feel from day to day, and they also help me to determine what it is that I'm going to eat. And we all know that food is medicine. And with kidney disease, how you feel is directly affected by what you put in your mouth, what you eat on a day-to-day basis. So I think that my labs are extremely important. I have a great relationship with my dietitian. We should all have a good relationship with our dietitian. I know that, you know, when we see the dietitian coming with the papers, sometimes we pull the covers over our head, or we act like we don't want to see them, you know, coming, or we don't want to talk to them. But in all honesty, your dietitian really needs to be one of your closest friends, because they can help you to adjust your diet, to talk about healthy food choices, and to help you to really live a better quality of life on a day-to-day basis. So my labs are extremely important to me.
I totally agree. And there's one other little point there, and that is that when you get those the what I call the happy sheets, that's just the surface labs. Every month when you run your labs at your clinic, whether in center or home, you have actually a complete set of labs, 3 or 4 pages worth. And you want to make
Yeah.
sure that when you go into clinic, you ask for a copy of those labs, not just the happy face. You want the real in-depth labs so you can see what your chloride is and your sodium and, you know, all of the other values that affect your well-being. Because on dialysis, you know, we just don't know what it's doing to our body month to month. So that's number one. Make sure you always ask and start learning to understand what those lab values mean. Jen, you might have a couple points from the clinician side, how to explain that.
I was going to say, ask to see your trends. It's really important to look at your trends. So whenever I would have patients coming in for a clinic appointment, I would always print at least 3 months. Usually it would be closer to 6, because what you really want is for someone to figure out where they feel okay and have a plan where they feel okay. And then you want to see that repeated consistently. And once you have that being repeated consistently, you have a patient whose primary complaint is not the dialysis anymore. When you have a patient whose primary complaint is not the dialysis anymore, as a nurse, I've always felt successful at that. So I think that there needs to be transparency. I think everyone needs to look at their labs in trend. And that helps make micro adjustments in your own ways to give yourselves the lives that you want. I think it's the dietitian and the nurse's responsibility to sit down with every single person and say, do you know what this means? Do you understand what this value is?
Absolutely.
What is it telling you about your life? I don't think a lot of people are comfortable enough with actually sitting down with a human being and telling them and talking about those numbers, but everyone really needs to know what they mean.
And a lot of times I'll ask questions like, what is this lab value? And they'll say, oh, it's okay. But you know, one that comes to mind, I think, is the RHC or RBC, one of the blood values. You see here I am, but you know, it's been low since day one, 10 years. And every month I say, why is this low? Oh, it's just because you're on dialysis. And I kind of have a hard time accepting that. I mean, I pick my battles, one of my recent an ongoing battles has always been anemia. Like Eric, first it took me years to figure out that I needed to keep my hemoglobin above 11 in order to get out of bed in the morning. So, okay, we get that. Now I have to work to get the right dose of my EPO with my iron and balance that. It's truly a balancing act. And you're literally fighting sometimes with the clinic because they have an algorithm that they have to go by. And your body may not fit that algorithm. And those are tough patient choices that we're basically facing. We know what we want, we know what our body needs, but now we can't get it because it's part of the clinic policy. And Phyllis, I would love for you to jump in here because lately there's been a lot of problems with some of the drugs that the clinics are using for anemia, for example. And is this an actionable item when a patient is actually left suffering with say hemoglobins of 7, 8, because the clinic won't change their protocol or their medication? Is that an actionable grievance?
It is. And actually, I was going to jump in just to share this a little bit too. There's only 4 authorized reasons for patients to be discharged from a dialysis clinic. 3 of them are, in essence, out of the patient's control. The one that the patient can control is their behavior in clinic. And I really doubt seriously if there's all that many people in dialysis administration that don't know that. Yet I get 2 or 3 calls a day from clinics wanting to discharge because a patient is non-compliant, meaning they don't go to dialysis. Or they miss a week and dialysis says, hey, we can't treat you until you've been cleared by the emergency room. The labs that y'all just mentioned is the perfect example of why it is. If you miss treatment, the clinic will require you to go to the ER. If you miss 3 treatments in a row, you are, in essence, as a patient, asking a physician to treat you blindly. They're guessing and hoping and praying with their fingers crossed that your hemoglobin's what it used to be, or they're guessing that your potassium's fine, any of those things. Okay, that's the reason. True enough, they can't discharge you, and they shouldn't discharge you, and I don't authorize the discharge. Patients have the right to accept or reject care. But the clinics are obligated to provide that care in the safest manner possible, following best practice regulations. Best practice says your labs are known.
Good point. So how do we have that difficult conversation? For instance, the patients that, most of us tend to be compliant in our care, but what happens when you disagree with something, a treatment, a protocol? Like I said, I disagreed with the protocol that I was getting for my anemia treatment. And it took me a long time and a lot of research and literally a temper tantrum to, tell them that this is what I needed. So how do we do this? I'm going to let Dawn start because you had a great, I'm not saying a great experience, but a really good teaching experience in rehab once.
Yeah, it was not a great experience, but it did put my advocacy work into practice. And like I said, I've spent 30 years teaching other patients how to advocate for themselves, and I had the opportunity, well, on many occasions over the past years, but this one in particular was pretty challenging. I had gone for surgery at the hospital, and after I had the surgery, I was told that I needed to go to a skilled nursing facility for rehabilitation. And I had already gone through this whole process one time before, and skilled nursing facilities, that's where you have to go for rehabilitation. Basically, it's a nursing home. And I wasn't happy about having to go for rehab, but I knew that I would have to go. I was sent to a rehabilitation facility, and I didn't really have an opportunity to pick. The coordinator came in and said, okay, it's time for you to be discharged. We're sending you to so-and-so facility. and it was so far away from home. It could have been in another state as far as I was concerned. And they pretty much just packed me up, wrapped me up in a sheet, put me in the ambulance, and sent me to this facility. I was put in a room that was non-private, and this was during the height of COVID.
Oh.
So I was already terrified about going to the skilled nursing facility because there were so many deaths being reported in the nursing homes during COVID. So I was frightened. I was in this room with another patient, and there was no curtains between the beds. It was dirty. And that's when my advocacy began. And they put me down on the bed, and they pretty much left me there for a few hours. They didn't admit me until hours later. I had no pain medication, and I just literally started screaming. That was my first, gut reaction. First of all, pain medication, and number two, what am I doing in this room? Um, and the whole coordination of care was just completely lacking. And after I had got done screaming that first night, um, obviously everybody's coming in now to find out what's going on, because I told them, I wanted to talk to my network. Let's get my network on the phone. And I wanted to talk to somebody from the state as well, because I knew, what my insurance coverage was, and I knew that I should have been in a private room. And so I had to get on the phone that next morning after the nurse manager and the administrator of the nursing home and everyone came in, because I was making so much noise. I got on the phone and I called my network, and I had to advocate for myself. And by the time I got through with those telephone calls, of course I was in the private room. However, once I was released from that skilled nursing facility, uh, I had to go back to the dialysis center because I wasn't allowed to be discharged home as a home dialysis patient, because I needed intravenous antibiotics. And I thought that was just absolutely it was ridiculous. I give myself dialysis every other day. Why can't I give myself the antibiotic? So they sent me back to in-center hemodialysis for these antibiotics instead of letting me go home and give myself the antibiotics. So by the time I was through with the dialysis center, I discharged myself from the dialysis center, and I sought out another provider. Luckily, I was able to get into contact with my network, and they arranged for me to go to another dialysis provider, and I can't say the name of
But
I can't
that
say
was
the
a good
name
move.
of the providers, but I left that dialysis center and I went to another dialysis center that was able to train me to give myself my own antibiotics, and I could go back home and do my treatments and get my antibiotics myself.
And Eric, this is a great spot for you to jump in, because you too had to take antibiotics for several months, and they wouldn't let you go home with antibiotics either, would they?
No, in fact, over my 23-year, I'm on my 23rd year run of mostly home dialysis, including peritoneal, variety of machines at home, and for probably the last 17 years with a next stage system 1 or Versi system, which is what I've been using. So I've had a really good run of not having any infections. A few years back, I did have a staph infection for a week, but we eventually found the right antibiotic and cleared that up, and I was able to keep my graft. What happened this time is, and I'm going to put it in the chat, is I ended up with MRSA,
Mhm.
and I just put that in there just so it's methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, and that means it's really hard to find the antibiotics in which to attack it. And in fact, I was in for a month, things were going well, but then it turns out either the MRSA changed, but it turned out those antibiotics weren't working. But the bottom line is, I have had a number of different abscesses in my arm. Here's my arm, and anyways, I just had surgery on Monday. Also, I'll talk about that later. But the key is on the second day when I was in the hospital. And here's the other thing: we got to give I guess we need to touch the elephant in the room. Medical care in hospitals is at its probably not its all-time low, but a recent low, because of a variety of reasons. One is our nurses shortage. One is because a lot of the hospitals have these contracts with visiting nurses such that they're so high that they can't even hire local nurses because they're so tied into these larger contracts.
Mhm.
And the same with technician. And I just experienced some techs that probably shouldn't have been in healthcare, but I think because of the low job applicant pool, they're searching wherever they can to get techs. And so not everybody, the response time may be slower than what you would want. And what happened when I was in there on the second day, I sat up and I felt wetness on my arm, and it turned out my graft of 6 years. So I've had a fistula, and these are accesses in which you put needles in order to run your dialysis. There's 2 needles, one to take the blood out and one to go through the machine, and then one to return the blood. Well, it blew up and it was bleeding. And so I pressed the light, and they said, "How may I help you?" I said, "I'm bleeding." And about 10 minutes later, they come in and they say, "Oh, you really are bleeding." And I was like, "What part of bleeding did you not understand?"
Oh my God.
Luckily, I did do, first aid. I knew to, put my hand over it to staunch the flow. But yeah, it was a bit of a mess. And then 2 days later, I had an emergency removal of that graft. And what had happened is this infection had started in my back, which we can talk about the pain of that later. But it also then spread to graft. And graft is a human-made material versus a fistula, which is your arteries and your veins fused together. And infections love to colonize on human-made materials, things that aren't supposed to be in our bodies in the first place. And so I ended up with, a emergency thigh catheter, and eventually we went back and forth, and eventually I got a catheter in my chest. So in essence, it was almost like all over again for me for dialysis, because that's what had happened 23 years earlier when I crashed into dialysis. But back to your point, Nilja, and Dawn's point, is eventually I'd come back to the hospital again in a few weeks after things weren't working, and we found an antibiotic regimen that worked. And finally I got to go home, and because I'd been doing dialysis in the hospital. And when I went home, and here's another thing, I'm sorry, real quick, is when you're used to nocturnal dialysis or more frequent dialysis, all of a sudden you're back to a 3 dialysis a week schedule, which really doesn't help you to feel your best. And so you're kind of struggling on dialysis while you're struggling to fight an infection or whatever you may be hospitalized for. And that really makes it difficult. And that's why Dawn was saying, why, I know because we've talked about it, Dawn, is why can't I go home and give myself these antibiotics so I can get back on the regimen that keeps me the healthiest? Well, for me, they said too much dialysis would dialyze the antibiotic too quickly. So they wanted the antibiotic to reside in my system for a while. And so I just, we talked about various things, and I just decided to let that happen. But now it took a long time. But my wife trained to do my catheter because I was doing everything, as Dawn had mentioned, everything myself before. I mean, my wife would be there, but I took pride in that, and I was able to travel because of that solo. But anyways, so I did the in-center, and I had to go all the way back to that and realizing why I was doing more frequent dialysis in the first place. I really didn't need the reminder, right? I knew why, but it was a refreshing reminder, sort of. Anyways, but then I trained for a couple of days, and then I was a little concerned about doing nocturnal, but it turns out nocturnal with a catheter is a piece of cake because there's no needles.
Yeah.
But I live in the Great Lakes state, and I love to get wet, so I'm looking forward to getting this removed. So my story is a little different than Dawn's, and I don't know if it was because of my provider or because we didn't fight about it or because we actually just believed the fact that I needed that dialysis to reside, because it's taken a long time to get to just prophylactic antibiotics. And I'm still on prophylactic antibiotics, but I'm MRSA free.
Mhm.
And that whole ordeal is, I'm on my 6th month of that recovery.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So did you end up having to do the antibiotics in center while you were recovering? They didn't let you do it at home?
Yeah, that's exactly what was happening. It really wasn't until I got to the prophylactic stage of
Right.
taking a pill versus IV antibiotics.
And it's an interesting point, and I don't want to take up too much time, but when COVID hit, I was on a working group with HHS, with Azar and all of the other CMS and everybody, and they were talking about getting the waivers that we needed to stay safe with home dialysis.
Mhm.
That's why you didn't have to go for your face-to-face visit. And I said, but what about all of the times that the clinic makes that patient go in for their Mircera shot, their EPO shot, their Venofer and medications? And CMS literally said, what do you mean? We don't have any requirement for that. So just be careful. A lot of times we'll hear, well, CMS requires this or
Right.
CMS requires that. And we're here to tell you that that is not always the case. And if you have a question, I would suggest you always contact the network and ask, because they're going to have the answers for you. And let you know that there is no
protocols or any requirements.
for
That's
not doing
exactly.
antibiotics at home. And
Mhm.
there are clinics now that are allowing patients to do this. And again, because the treatment should follow the patient. When you're vulnerable, when you've been sick, when you've had surgery, you really need to have your best treatment, not, not a substantial one or inadequate one. So that it's really important. Jen, looks like you were going to say something. Pop in here.
I'm just wildly, completely agreeing with everything you're saying. I never quite understood why it was when someone's recovering from something and they're already down homeostasis, the best thing you could possibly have in terms of recovery is replication of as much homeostasis as you can, great nutrition, and the ability to truly rest.
Yeah.
I don't feel the in-center treatments are easy on the body. I don't think that they're going to make a person feel better. I think that the transportation process alone, and Dawn hasn't even talked about her transportation process.
No.
But I'm sure that was its whole other situation that was horrible too. And there's a lot of things like that need to be corrected in this triangle of care that we have between the dialysis clinics, the hospitals, and the skilled nursing rehab facilities, because dialysis patients aren't really getting much rehab. And that's a big elephant in a room. And yes, dialysis patients on home hemo should totally be able to give themselves antibiotics if they want. I love when people came in and wanted to sit and chat and let me slow push some Venofer on them, but
Right.
they don't need me for that. If they would like me for that, it's fine, but no one needs their nurse for that.
So a couple of things have come up here, and Phyllis, maybe you can help us address, how do you refuse treatment? I mean, as you said, it's not against any rules or regulations to refuse treatment. So how would you, as a patient, recommend that someone say, no, I'm not doing that particular treatment, or I want this, I know this is what I need? And perhaps I even tie that in with there is a patient bill of rights, both in the dialysis clinic and in the hospitals.
And I'm happy to answer that. I want to jump back real quick.
Yep.
Chances are, if you've got insurance that covers dialysis, you have insurance that covers home health. There is never a valid reason for anyone to tell you you have to be in rehab to get IV antibiotics. Now you have to be an IV to get antibiotics so they can bill Medicare,
Yeah.
but you don't have to be in rehab to get IV antibiotics. In fact, please forgive me. I'm crossing a personal line here with a little self-disclosure, but I gave my husband IV antibiotics for a MRSA infection post-op about 2 years ago. No bill. No bill. I'm not a nurse. Nothing. So I'm telling you, if somebody says that to you, you need to question. If that's your comfort level, by all means. But my experience from being a hospital case manager is that what insurance will cover becomes what physicians recommend oftentimes.
Mhm.
And the two are not interchangeable. As far as exercising your right to a different type of care, I'm not trying to equate people to automobiles. Please don't think that. But in a way, it's very similar. You may take your automobile to get a brake job, and somebody says to you, we got to take the rotors, we've got to gut it, you'll need new tires, you have to have all this stuff. It'll be $2,000. Check, please. And you may think to yourself, that doesn't sound right. So what you say is, thank you for your opinion. I appreciate it. I'm going to seek a second opinion. And then you go find the folks down the road that are going to do it for like $400. Dialysis and hospital stays and physician recommendations are all in that same vein, which is, it's a service industry. Well, as a patient, you want to be very respectful and you want to defer to the doctor in terms of their expertise. They went to med school for 11 years. They did an internship. They did all the stuff. And certainly that knowledge is worth quite a bit. It does not mean that they're the great, all-powerful, and all-knowing Oz. And their treatment choices may not be something that jives with where you are at in your treatment. So it's completely okay to say to the physician, Doc, I appreciate it. Thank you. As you know, this is a very serious thing for me. I have a couple of other options I want to consider. I promise we'll have an answer to you by, and then pick a day, 48 hours, tomorrow, whatever it is. Because again, this is a service profession. Yes, you want to be polite. Yes, you want to be respectful. But the bottom line is you're paying somebody for service. So by definition, they work for you. And if they can't work for you in a manner that supports you, they may not be the best physician for you.
I have a perfect example. I was in the hospital for emergency AFib. A cardiologist I'd never met came in. She was quite condescending. I went through everything and was getting ready to get discharged the next day. Everything was calmed down. And she came in and said, I'm not discharging you till we take off 4 kilos of fluid. And I looked at her and I said, if you take 4 kilos of fluid off of me, I never take off any fluid and I still have residual function. If you take 4 kilos off of me, I will die. I can guarantee you it will be fatal. And she's like, no, you will do it. And I'm like, she said, and then she said, I'm calling your nephrologist. And I said, oh, please do. She did. And he said, send her home. I went home and I did exactly what I knew I needed to do. Short daily treatments for 2 or 3 days, just fluid, pulled that fluid off. It came off gentle. I did have no repercussions. And, there was no after effect. And I was just like, that's a perfect example. How do you say no? I mean, it's just one of those things, but I just knew intuitively. And I feel so badly. What if somebody didn't say no? And then the next thing you know, they were, thrown over the edge, hypotensive, but, crashed, whatever. It's.
And I can tell you oftentimes what happens is their survivors call me and want to know where to file suit. And I have to say, call an attorney.
Yeah.
Being in situations like yours, I'm not saying that every single thing that a physician recommends could go wrong and end in your death. I don't mean that by any stretch. But everyone has their own vision of their self-directed care. I've had patients who say, I don't care what the research says, I'm going once a week. I'm going to split the difference between being a slave to dialysis and having a free quality of life where I come and go as I please. So their doctors will write orders saying, physician advises dialysis 3 times a week. Patient exercises right to reject care 1 time a week.
Yeah. And it
Yeah.
probably is doing just as well, because of that. And one
It's a
thing that I
balance.
just want to bring up, and we won't go into it here, but I want everybody, it's online, it's in every facility, it's in every hospital, and that is the patient's Bill of Rights, because that does tell you what you have certain rights and responsibilities to your clinicians, and they have rights and responsibilities to you. And it really comes in handy. I had an experience in a hospital once, and I went in weeks later to meet with the director, and I just went through, here's your rights, here's your Bill of Rights. And I went through and I said, you violated X, that, what, Z, all of them. And, he visibly paled because that's a serious violation and they're there for a reason. So always, if you don't keep a copy in your purse or your wallet, but go get one.
Yeah, and speak up is the biggest thing. If something doesn't feel right or it doesn't sound right, ask questions. Do your homework. If it's not somebody in the dialysis facility that is able to answer you, get on the telephone and call your network, because they have the answers and they're there to
Do.
advocate for you. I can't impress that enough. I've had to call the network, on several occasions just because something just didn't sound quite right to me. And with this last incident with the antibiotics, I just didn't feel right. And just like Jennifer said, I had a horrible experience because I was going to the dialysis center, doing 3 times a week dialysis. They were taking off too much fluid. I had to drive to the dialysis center right after surgery. So my leg was, had just been operated on, and do dialysis. And then after having too much fluid taken off, I had to drive back home. So what kind of rehabilitation is that?
It's actually dangerous. And
Exactly. So it was horrible. And that's why I had to drop that provider and go to somebody else that was able to meet my needs better. So just don't be afraid to say, no, this is not right for me. And I'm going to get a hold of somebody who can give me some advice on this situation, because I don't feel good about what you're telling me.
And someone asked a question from the audience, can you please elaborate what the network is? And I know Phyllis addressed that earlier a little bit, but I also want to, one of the issues that you can have a grievance with the network or file and where they can help you is quality of care. So if you are not getting the treatment you need, if you every day go in and you feel worse than you did the day before, if the treatment is making you sick, any number of things, do not accept what normally happens, which is it's dialysis and deal with it. That is not, what you should accept. You can call the network and talk to them about what you can expect as quality of care. Your doctor, your nurse, your clinicians should be working with you to achieve the best quality of care. It should never be, a punitive situation where you're, sit in the chair, put your arm out and do this, and it has to be a two-way conversation. And so if you're not getting that, then the network can help you try to, bridge that conversation. And sometimes all it is that we're just not connecting. But that's their job. And Phyllis, you might have a few things to throw in there. There we go.
2 things. One, I just typed in the Medicare website address for what is a renal network.
Yes.
And that will explain, and if you don't have the ability to copy and paste right this second, you can always go to cms.gov, type in ESRD, and you're going to get more hits than you have time to look at.
Or esrdnetwork.org, I think is the other site.
Yeah.
So
that's where you can get it. But I'll speak for Network 5, where I'm assigned, but I'm sure it's true across the board. One of the most fun things that I do is serve as an advocate for patients when they have interdisciplinary meetings with the staff. So like I may have somebody call me and say, I think maybe the clinic isn't doing quite right, and they want to talk to me. Will you participate? They just put me on speakerphone and I help. And that happens quite a lot
Mm-hmm.
when there's questionable behavior or when a facility throws around the threat of discharge. No, we're not going to retaliate against patients. No, you're not going to discharge them because they were 30 minutes late. No, any of those things. So please know, if you ever feel like you're struggling with the clinic and you really feel like your voice isn't being heard, call your network, ask for the grievance officer, and say, hey, look, I really think I'm kind of getting the runaround here. Is there any way possible that you could participate via conference call? If I do it, I'm sure everybody does, truthfully. And it's a really great way to stave off stuff later on down the road. I tell people it's kind of like the old AMCO commercial. You can pay me now or pay me later, but you're going to pay. So if you're going to have to invest time in brokering a dispute with your clinic, do it on the front end before everybody's feelings get hurt and it escalates to something you just soon not deal with.
So true.
All right. So one last sum up. I think if everybody could just give us a little bit of maybe your last tips. I know, Eric, you just spent quite a long time in the hospital and you have mentioned some, instead of woe is me moments, wow moments. How do we change that? How do we get the wow?
So yeah, I put this on my Facebook page to advertise. I said from going from woe is me to wow, it's me. And I put a picture of me smiling before my surgery on Monday. And I guess I'm going to make it quick, but part of it is trusting your surgeon. And here's the thing: some of this can be more difficult for others if you don't have transportation. But if you even have to search, maybe the church van can take you, to a better surgeon. So for me, there's not that many good vascular surgeons in the region that I live in. And so there are some about an hour away in Flint. And I found the best one was in Southfield, Michigan, which is another hour away to the east of East Lansing. You guys kind of, oh, wait a minute, this one, here you go. So here's here. So we're either going here or we're going there. And that's the Upper Peninsula for my friends up north. But anyways, that's important. So I've just had 3 fistula surgeries in the last 7 weeks. One was to take out graft material that started to pop up from when the graft was removed in November. And then surprisingly, usually when you have already had a fistula in an area like my upper bicep, left bicep, generally you can't make a fistula. So you go to grafts, which we talked about as the man-made tubing. But what's happened over time is that brachial artery had reshaped itself so that I could get another fistula. So then, so it's been like every 2 weeks. And then I got the fistula surgery and it was great. But then, of course, it wasn't high enough and there was some leakage. So they did what's called a super fistulization, which rose it up to the top because you got to be able to get that needle in. And so that's what I'm on now. And so hopefully in 1 to 3 weeks. But there's a couple other things, I guess. So trusting your physician and, even if it's nephrology, if you have an option, if like somebody says you can't do home dialysis and they don't support it in that clinic, if you're in a larger city, there may be others within that city that you can search. But for me, I had to go from Lansing in 2006 and found another clinic that would give me home dialysis with the next stage machine. Then I had to go to Detroit to get it to do nocturnal. So that's becoming educating yourself, but then you have to use that education to really push for your own advocacy. And it's always easier if you have somebody to advocate with you. A couple other quick tags is you want to get out of the Red Sox as soon as you can. First of all, when you go to a hospital and you're going to be there for a while, depending on what's happening, you may have to check your dignity at the door. Because some of the things that you are proud that you can take care of yourself, especially some of the personal cleanliness items, you may not be able to do. And that with the back pain that I had to just give that up. And that was a bit humiliating until I realized it was part of the function of the staff's jobs. And so you kind of got to get past that. Red Sox means you can't walk on your own. And so we were talking about physical therapy and perhaps occupational therapy. It's hard when you're in pain. It's hard to be able to do these things. And so you have to have patience with your therapist, and you have to really push yourself. You have to push yourself till you can't. And then you got to know to say, no, today I can't do PT. I'm not going to do it today. And so those are other aspects of advocating. It's very difficult when you're in the hospital for a long stay and you're on a renal diet. Because if you're in there 1 week, you can have the meatloaf, the baked cod, and the dried out chicken, you kind of spread it out. But when you're in there for a month, you got to rotate those three over and over and over again. And the only thing you're looking forward is the Luigi's cherry ice or the Luigi's lemon ice, because gosh, you're not having any dairy, for dessert. So it takes patience to deal with that dialysis menu we were talking about, with what we know that we can and cannot eat. And I guess lastly, you have to watch out for stacking of medicines. My pain was so severe, it was very difficult to get the right pain regimen. And stacking means when you're not peeing, some are going to be metabolized through your liver, some are going to be metabolized through your kidney. And, you got to be careful if you're taking different kinds and at how much. And at one point, my wife just had to really advocate. And luckily, we found a hospital doctor because you might have a handful of doctors, right? And it's really the hospital doctor that, that might be in charge of your pain. And we just said, none of this is working. And we had to start over and figure out that something actually did work. And that's the other thing. So those are kind of 3 or 4, once you're in the hospital, what to expect when you're going in. You got to, if you have your best doctor, if you have God on your side, if you have people praying for you, you don't need to be afraid to actually do the surgery. You're going to go in, it's going to happen, and there's a high likelihood that it's going to be successful. We won't talk about the opposite, because if it isn't, it doesn't matter. But that's kind of my attitude. And I just did my 21st surgery. And so it's worked for me. I'm sorry, I probably spoke too long.
Dawn. Well, you're on mute.
Well, that's very helpful.
Hey.
No, I just really wanted to say that I said it before. Speak up. Don't let anything happen to you that doesn't feel good.
Right.
You have to advocate for yourself. Have your family members when you're in the hospital. If you have family members and friends that can come up and check in on you, that always helps. When people in the hospital see that you have family members and friends coming to visit you for some reason, they tend to check on you a little bit more often. But if that's not the case and you are in the hospital, and like Eric said, there's sometimes when you're going to have to just, give in and let yourself be cared for. But do your very best to pay attention to what's being done to you and for you. Ask for what you want and for what you need. Make sure that people are checking on you. Ask about your medications. What are you giving me? What is this medication? If it doesn't look like what you're used to taking, then you ask them, what is that, and what it's for. Just ask questions. And if it doesn't feel right to you, again, we've been talking about your network the whole program. Get on the telephone and call your network. There's 18 networks throughout the country. Go on these websites and find out which one is yours. And anytime that you go into the hospital, a skilled nursing facility, make sure that you have those telephone numbers so that you can call someone in case you're not satisfied with the care that you're being given. It's going to happen at some point during your kidney journey where you're going to have to step up and speak up. And just don't be afraid to do that. because you have a right to quality care, and you have a right to get the kind of care that you feel satisfied with. And if you're not satisfied with the care that you're given, then make sure that you're calling somebody so that you can get the help that you need.
Absolutely. Jen, you want to summarize and give us a few points from your perspective?
I have a few. Real quick, I recommend highly that if you're a dialysis patient and you are in the hospital, that you, if capable, watch every single thing that every single person that enters your room or tries to touch you or goes near watch everything they do. Make sure they're washing their hands. If they need to scrub a line, place an IV, make sure they're doing it in the aseptic way that they have. I've had to train patients asepsis. I hold myself to the same standards that I held my patients to. And vice versa. I see a lot of nurses cutting corners, and patients know the difference. And I'm
Right.
sorry if it hurts a nurse's feelings. That's really not the patient's problem or fault at all. You tell the nurse, and if they have any problem, take it up a notch, because
Yep.
the second leading cause of death is infections in this population, and that's almost completely preventable, and more often than not it is the healthcare provider's fault. So make them do the right thing.
One other
It's
good
okay.
suggestion is when you are in the hospital, always get the number of the patient advocate for that hospital. And I have called them from bedside many a time and told them to get up there to my room and discussed an issue with them. And it really helps to intervene. Again, it's so hard to stand up for our rights, but if we don't, it's literally our lives that are at stake. And Phyllis, I know we've talked a lot about the networks. People still have questions. We know that you can find the networks online at esrd.org. You look for the one in your state. I think they have a nice map, and you find your state and it'll tell you which network is yours. But the networks have a wealth of information, as well as advocacy and going to bat for the patient. So give us a few final.
I feel like y'all are all ready to do my job. Thank you so much. It's wonderful. And I really am grateful. What I'll leave you with is this, to kind of reiterate what Jennifer said, which is with the end of the PHE, with the official end of the pandemic, there has been, I have noticed, a trend towards people being not so hypervigilant about cross-contamination as perhaps they were when COVID first reared its ugly head. And I say that based on a tremendous shift in telephone calls from patients. So everything Jennifer said, everything any of us said, absolutely 100%, please note that no change in cross-contaminant protocol was implemented when the PHE officially ended. Everything that they had to do April 1st, they have to do June 1st.
Yep.
So please be hypervigilant, understand the same things that were true before are true now. Don't let somebody reuse gloves on you. Don't let them cross-contaminate from an isolation room with a coat that goes to the chair side on the main treatment floor, et cetera, et cetera. And by all means, please never, ever, ever hesitate to call your network. Every network, by statute, by congressional order, has somebody that does what I do. So they will help you. If you are just not happy searching for it on a computer, you don't have a computer, you're not comfortable doing it independently, pick up the phone and call. You can always call. Nilja has phone numbers she can route you to. If you call me, I'll just let you know which network you need to call and give you the phone number. Nobody's going to let you flounder, I promise. One of the things I tell my patients is no doesn't mean no. It just means you dialed the wrong phone number. Pick the phone back up and hit it again.
Well, I want to thank all of our wonderful guests tonight. I mean, this was such an important conversation. I think we're going to try to continue it next month unless we all decide to go on vacation. So again, thank you so much. And if you have any questions or want to review things that were said tonight, get the information, just go to our website, and within a day or two, this whole conference will be posted. And again, a super thanks to all of our sponsors who help us put on these websites, and webinars. So kudos, and again, thank you to the sponsors. All right, everybody, have a nice night, and you can stay on and chat if you'd like.